Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us in the webinar zone. My name is Sean Meyer and I'm the Senior Content Editor for Municipal World. I'm excited to introduce today's webinar sponsored by Portage CyberTech on the difficulties faced when managing identity systems. Without further ado, I shall pass this over to our guest speakers.
Thanks, Sean. And as Sean noted, we have a fantastic discussion today that we put forward research to support the assertion that the future of digital services requires consent-based identity services. This research is put forward by Portage CyberTech, a Converge company. So let's look at our lineup for today. And we have Don Cuthbertson, CEO of Portage CyberTech, myself, Joni Brennan, President of the Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, Jay Bretzman, Research VP of Security at IDC, Martin Burke, Product Manager at Portage CyberTech. So let's discuss the importance of privacy for municipalities. Municipalities are the closest governments that we do transactions with almost every day. If you think about it, we transact quite a little when it comes to federal government needs, a little bit more with our provinces and those types of service delivery. With our municipalities, we're interacting almost every day. For us at the DIAC, we believe that the municipalities play an incredibly important role as that government of proximity to us, and they need to work together to ensure that we have privacy and trust to move our digital economy forward. We see through our studies the ability to unlock potential of 3 to 6% of unrealized GDP by working together on privacy, trust, and digital credentials to help move this ecosystem forward. So this is especially important for municipalities. And if we think about all the potential of smart cities and smart services moving forward, these elements are foundational. Now, by working together, to instill privacy, trust, and cybersecurity in everything that we do, this will help us work together as a society to move forward and at global scale. So let's get into some of our research for today, and I'm going to pass it over to Jay to take us through the next steps.
All right, we want to start out just by kind of doing a quick level set here. And, you know, unless you're brand new to identity, you understand that it's a difficult thing, right? Identity is a technology that's been around for, say, 50 years. And back when IT was just used for back office stuff, it was pretty simple. You probably didn't even make up your own password. It was given to you. But you know, as we've grown beyond that, inside the organization, inside that safe perimeter, things kind of got more complicated and you had different levels of permissions and privilege. And then all of a sudden, the perimeter kind of got torn down, right? And the challenge, of course, is to accommodate those older systems because generally they still run the business, but also reduce the friction for new customers or new users and identities that are coming into the organization. Along with that perimeter declining, we saw, you know, cybercrime jump. You know, think back 20, 30 years and there were worms, computer worms, right? And stuff like that. And that's the way people broke in the networks. And there were all kinds of viruses and Trojans and backdoors and stuff like that. Difficult to write, right? Costly to do. But then when the perimeter disappeared and the internet came out, all of a sudden you had mobile devices, different places people were coming from. Very much, you know, a much more difficult challenge to track from an identity standpoint. Also, those different users we're talking about, they all have different permissions and you want to not impair their productivity. One of the biggest arguments against doing things like multi-factor authentication is that you're putting in friction, right? And people don't know how to deal with that. And there are certain reasons why you really don't need it. If you're ordering a $10 pizza, do I need to show my driver's license? No. So those are kind of some of the challenges there. And then lastly, it's really about, you know, budgets. And I've often been asked the question, well, we hear that identity is so important. How come you don't raise your forecast? And I tell people, I said, because security budgets don't grow on trees, right? People just don't get handed a bucket of money and say, here, solve a new problem. It's a function of, you know, usually corporate revenue, and it gets allocated across multiple different, you know, categories of IT security. In some studies I've done in the past, where does identity rank in terms of priorities? Generally about third. Some organizations that are more public facing, second, but rarely first. First is usually network security.
So talking to many public sector and broader public sector organizations at Portage, we see those topics that Jay just mentioned come up repeatedly, and local governments are experiencing the same complexities. We see program owners struggling with the challenge of delivering services across disparate service lines, different systems, and legacy technology as well. When you add in new privacy legislation and new technologies, as well as new concepts like zero trust, it complicates the already difficult challenges that IT decision makers face today. We're kind of like changing the wheels on the bus while it's moving. I'd say that said, there are some really great opportunities to innovate, to focus on the end user, the citizens, to span silos and deliver those great experiences that also preserve privacy and enhance trust. Martin, could you please explain a little bit about how our work with IDC came about?
Sure thing. Thanks, Don. So given all of the complexities noted on the previous slides by Jay and Don, it is really a new reality when navigating digital service delivery for governments. To better understand this reality, validate our own thesis and some of our findings in the market, Portage CyberTech, leveraging IDC's great reach, undertook a survey in early 2022 of 369 government, higher education and healthcare organizations across Canada and the United States. Some of the findings are summarized in this webinar, as well as perspectives around identity solutions and key recommendations on how to navigate purchasing decisions. I'll now hand back to Jay, who will take us through some of the recent evolution in this space specifically.
Yeah, and so the roots of identity access management really had to do with, workforce identity management. It was all, your employees and maybe your partners, right, that you would extend an identity to. But typically, all of the systems were inside, behind a firewall, through a VPN, all that kind of stuff. And it was much more controllable at that point. It was also much more contained. You knew how many people were going to access the system, right? It doesn't like grow from 10,000 to 1 million overnight. So much more controllable. You also had a much better understanding of the devices and the locations that people would come and use. Typically, it's going to be some type of, workstation, laptop, whatever, inside an organization. And so you weren't as concerned about, is this an attacker and where are they coming from? More recently, and many companies got into more of the B2C identity management, and B2C can be a number of things. I mean, I was just on my, my medical provider's website looking at test results today, and that could be considered B2C identity management. But ever since the pandemic kind of hit, B2C has been more associated with keeping the business alive, having an online capability to do a full, retail sales type of environment. And in that case, you're coming from the opposite side of the spectrum. Workforce, type people can put up with friction. They have to. You want the paycheck or not, right? A B2C side is much more fickle in that regard. And usually there are a number of suppliers you can go to. So if somebody makes it difficult for you, you abandon the cart and you move on. That's kind of something we've seen a lot in the past. So along with that change to B2C came additional challenges, right? And two of the things we wanted to talk about was personally identifiable information, things that organizations store once they get information from consumers and customers, stuff like that, that will figure out who they are and then be used as an identity kind of like compromise, where their identity is stolen and somebody else starts opening up bank accounts. So that's one side. The other one is personal data. It's data about that person that you would not want to disclose. And the one of the poster children for this is health medical records, right? Anybody can get a new credit card number, pretty quickly. But once your medical data is stolen, that doesn't change. And so there are different requirements for protecting both.
I'll now take you through Portage CyberTech's position in the market, starting to look at how we address the problems touched on so far. As Jay has mentioned, organizations will typically have procured solutions from traditional identity and access management providers to handle authorization workflows, privileged access management, and lifecycle management pertaining to security needs around identity assets and data sets internal to their enterprise. In an ever-changing landscape where citizen expectations around online experiences are as high as they've ever been, these traditional approaches are not sufficient to support a streamlined digital program and service delivery strategy. Governments rarely launch digital services in a coordinated one-phase approach. In our experience, it is common for an individual service line or department to have chosen one of these providers due to pressures to provide modern authentication methods for their specific services. This disjointed approach only increases risk as it pertains to data security and service adoption levels over time. Secondly, looking at the right side of the screen, consent management is a system or process for allowing consumers or citizens to grant or refuse access to any system's usage or personal data requested by a service. It has also become prevalent worldwide because of the lawful requirement for websites to obtain user consent for collecting data through cookies while browsing, for example. Organizations across the world are now responsible for collecting and managing customer consent. Our consent-based identity services approach does not presume this consent. In a service-specific context, for a user to achieve a specific outcome, they must agree to provide the information needed for that outcome and are allowed to proceed only when consent has been granted. This notion of progressive disclosure, contextual to the use case, puts control for the sharing of personal information in the hands of the user for each specific engagement, and it allows for the continued adherence to established and continually developing data privacy legislation like GDPR and Law 25, which has recently become legislation here in Quebec, Canada. Natively built into our offerings are the principles of privacy by design. We look to store the bare minimum of personally identifiable information about a user in our solution, and our policy engine allows for the creation, publication, and continual changes to adapt to evolving regulations. It is a solution for governments to the problem of centrally managing, publishing, and capturing consent for all service policies from the constituent population. Portage CyberTech bridges the divide between traditional IAM providers who focus on data security and access management within the enterprise and the nexus of initiatives by lawmakers to establish ever more robust data protection legislation and growing awareness and expectations from citizens around their rights in this regard. Interoperability is central to what we do. We have pre-built integrations to many of the typical identity and access management providers who do not overlap with our core competencies. It is not a barrier to deploying our capabilities, but an opportunity to complement and augment what a customer is already using these providers for in the traditional IAM sense. Looking to provide all government services under one roof, Portage offers a consistent UI and UX with a specific focus on consent management, trust, security, and extensibility, which we believe are all core elements of a digital service delivery strategy. I'll hand back to Jay, who will reveal some of the findings of our study.
We asked dozens of questions, right? And what we did is we grabbed a couple of the more salient points here to talk about. What we're looking at here is one that people kind of resonated with. We asked them a lot of questions and they gave us, typical answers. And that happens a lot with surveys. But when we asked them about how confident are you that you're able to protect personal data for external users, we got different ranges of answers. And, the big box in the middle says we're somewhat confident. We're pretty sure. Well, pretty sure isn't good enough, really. When somebody breaks into your network and they grab that data and now you're in violation of God knows how many regulations, right? And if you look, above that, not very sure, and very unconfident, you got over half to 2/3 of the sample saying, we could probably do better. We would be interested in talking to a vendor who has a better personal data protection capability. And you see higher education being one of the bigger ones there. And the reason, of course, is that higher education, your user population turns over every 4 years type of thing. It's a much more dynamic environment than, say, a healthcare environment.
I agree completely. And Portage CyberTech was really created around the idea of enabling our customers in public sector, broader public sector, and regulated industries to be able to deliver a consumer-grade digital service experience, to take advantage of that continued shift to a customer-centric model in those sectors. Do that, we provide an extensible framework that Martin's going to talk about in a minute or so. But that framework is there for them to be able to add new services incrementally, but do so in a way that preserves privacy and builds trusted interactions with their constituents. Once live, we provide a very simple mechanism to be able to analyze the service adoption rates. We found that being able to clearly demonstrate adherence to changing privacy legislation and putting that emphasis on user-driven consent of their information sharing through, of course, secure interactions really enables trust, which leads to increased adoption and much higher satisfaction rates. And internal to the enterprise, we provide the tools that are necessary to conduct audits. So that combination really drives confidence among the end users and, of course, efficiency for the government enterprise. Martin, would you mind talking about our solution, please?
Sure thing, Don. Thank you. So as we've been discussing, organization, including those in public sectors, small to medium, federal, state government, oftentimes operate loosely organized system landscapes, which ultimately leads to a very siloed approach to digital service delivery and very different website experiences across government services. Disparate systems lead to an ever-expanding threat surface also, and user experience is almost always compromised with the need to manage multiple profiles and unique logins required for each system, both of which combine to provide needless complexity and risk when it comes to securing data. Moreover, each application may have different identity verification requirements, with low sensitivity applications requiring very little information and higher sensitivity applications requiring a robust identity verification process. There is little consideration given to the reason for requesting data of a user. Asking them to submit the same level of personal information across all potential scenarios when it is not necessary adds complexity, reduces trust, and ultimately acts as a barrier to adoption of digital services. Before I get into a little bit more detail on our solution capabilities, I'll hand back to Jay to look at some related aspects of our study as well.
Yeah, thanks, Martin. So this is another key finding that we had, one that kind of jumps off the page at you. How important would it be to allow the users themselves to control the level of credential sharing that happens when you log into a system? A lot of people have called this self-sovereign identity. Some organizations call it verifiable credentials, all that kind of stuff. And here you can see that it was very appealing in many cases, somewhat appealing in many more. And very few people said, no, I don't want to control my own destiny, right? And I think the whole industry is moving this direction. It's going to require a little bit more infrastructure, to be built out, kind of like an EV sort of solution. You need charging stations along the way. People need to, and organizations and applications need to be adapted to deal with these type of credentials. But as you can see, the appeal is very strong. One other point we looked at was the interest in integrating with legacy-based backend systems. There are a number of ways that you can talk to legacy systems. You can use the API they defined, right? Which means that you have multiple types of logins, often can't be solved with, say a SAML type in SSO type approach. And that is acceptable in certain environments, more so in the workplace than the consumers, right? But legacy-based systems still are, the workhorses of many applications and many organizations. And so what we saw was that the appeal was pretty strong, would be very interested in providing, call it like a man-in-the-middle approach, where you have a front-end authentication system that has modern technology, right? And people are able to do, facial recognition or some other type of, push token, whatever, instead of just username and password. And then the backside, that system then interfaces with the legacy component and provides it with the type of authentication that it requires in order to provide that access.
Yeah, on this one, Jay, it's spot on. I mean, we realize that no CIO or CISOs really has the opportunity or even the appetite to rip and replace legacy infrastructure or applications, especially not all at once. So our strategy at Portage has been to be complementary rather than competitive with the existing infrastructure. See a couple of examples there. We support common standards-based authentication protocols like SAML, OAuth, OIDC. That way, the initial authentication, that account security, and the profile management are handled within our application. Second is our ability to broker access to downstream applications for users through a federated single sign-on experience. That's another way that we can integrate to many downstream applications, from custom SaaS applications to legacy COBOL mainframes. Being able to deploy a digital service platform with the support of the standard authentication protocols, at the same time being able to extend the useful life of existing infrastructure is a great benefit to governance. And there's a benefit to the citizen as well through the great user experience, which is something that they've come to expect in this growing customer-centric world that we live in. Martin, I'll pass it to you. Oh, sorry, Jane.
One more quick comment. I would say if you actually did a live demo instead of a survey, you'd see these numbers jump, right? People would go, wow, you can do that? Come see me. Let's do a demo. Let's do a trial.
Yeah, I like to hear that. And I agree. Martin, would you mind elaborating a little bit more on the digital trust matrix?
Sure thing. Thanks, Don. So we come back to the problem statement I touched on a few moments ago, but we see, just in summary, we see very siloed system landscapes with varying levels of user experience and multiple logins required. We've all experienced that. Disparate systems obviously lead to an ever-expanding threat service, and both of which combine to result in that needless complexity and risk when it comes to securing data. We typically also see in our engagement with clients a lot of friction when it comes to providing personally identifiable information out of context or multiple times across different services, when the emphasis should really be on managing consent and providing a mechanism for progressive disclosure instead. So if we up-level the user in our graphical representation here and apply the Portage solution vision to the problem. So we employ a platform approach called the Digital Trust Matrix. It is a platform through which we integrate all of our capabilities. First is the Portage portal, which offers the content management and UI design capabilities, leveraging the Drupal digital experience platform. Some of the largest websites, most popular brand websites in the world, such as Tesla, CNN, the Australian government, are built on Drupal, for example. And really having these capabilities built in natively to our platform brings that unity of UI UX from a citizen experience perspective, providing one front door to access all services and the consumer grade digital experience that they've come to expect. Second is our consent-based identity services in the form of our Citizen One product. This provides the consent management and policy engine capabilities that I've been speaking of, as well as identity verification for those higher sensitivity services. So never looking to replicate data stores. Instead, we validate against existing ones that reside on the government servers within their firewall. And once trust is established, the user can go about their business accessing their chosen government services supported by that legacy infrastructure and by those existing services and applications. So overall, in summary, ensuring information is protected and the user's right to data privacy respected, we achieve that balance between data security, consumer grade UI UX, data privacy, and the notion of progressive disclosure of personal data in the context of the specific service, all of which we believe combines to facilitate trusted interactions. I'll turn it over to you again, Jay, to cover off on some more nuances of our study.
Sure thing. In this one, we kind of said, if you were going to invest in a new identity system, if you want to take that leap, and a lot of people kind of, cower at that whole idea because identity is hard. Identity tends to be a boil the ocean approach. We always encourage people to take it, department by department with the risk score, the highest risk scores first. But anyway, in this survey, what we did is we asked people, what would what would motivate you the most to adopt a new identity system? And the first one was kind of the intelligence test, reduction in cyber attacks. Yeah, that's a good one, right? And everybody kind of pretty much chose that. But right underneath it was simplify the user login experience. And I don't know about you guys, but some of the systems that I sign on to are still kind of the older, if they have any second factor, it's SMS OTP. It's a little annoying at times. I typically have to change my glasses to read the little like digits on my phone type of thing. So bringing that in and improving that, of course, not only gives you better productivity out of people, but it also encourages them and gives them a better brand experience all of them together. Right behind that, of course, is the help desk and automated password resets. So many dollars have been wasted, in IT systems because I can't remember what my password was, or, I need some other type of help. And I've seen some ridiculous numbers as to how expensive a password reset is done. And then you ask, certain people, well, how many password resets do you do? And the number is, depending upon the size of your organization, 1,000 a day. That's a lot of money. And then underneath that, of course, is once I get logged in, can you give me something that makes it easier for me to find the applications that I want to run, right? A dashboard approach, right? And a lot of people have tiled dashboards. These are the only applications you can use. And that's a very helpful thing as well. And then the other benefits behind it. So we're kind of coming back around now, and we've talked about how many challenges are out there, the benefits that people hope to realize, and we're trying to say, okay, how do we resolve these identity complexities? I'm sorry to say there's no silver bullet, no panacea, no pending standard that's going to correct all this, because again, we're looking at 50, 30, whatever years of application development of IT usage from the back office to the front office to the front line. And they all have different needs and different requirements, different devices. How many devices do people use? I use 4 personally, right? And I like it when people and when applications recognize me no matter which one I'm using. One of the things I never try to do is accept the strong password that gets offered me on my phone. Because if I do that, my iPad doesn't connect because I don't know what that strong password is. So there are many challenges like that. And then there are just thousands of apps out there still that are unique and require different access methods. And a lot of people would write connectors to approach these applications. But if you can bring a new kind of, let's call it a gateway technology, right? That would give you access to them, that's a big win for people. Don, do you want to chime in a little?
Yeah, definitely, Jay. Thanks.
Okay.
I think when it comes to finding that balance between effective digital service delivery while mitigating against increasing cybersecurity threats, which in itself is massively difficult, the continued challenges that the role identity management and digital identity play just add an extra layer of complexity, as you mentioned. Based on our experience, we see the challenges kind of come up in a couple ways, right? So as you said, there's evolving standards and policies that are put out by governments at both the provincial and federal level as these programs get rolled out. In fairness, generally speaking, this really isn't a widely understood topic beyond those groups creating the standards and policies, including at the local government as well. And the role that private sector has played and continues to play in this area when it comes to digital identity, like is it my Google ID, my Apple ID, Facebook, that confuses the issue even further. So I'd say that, those are the kind of things that we're looking at Portage as well. Jay, can you just pass it back to you for a minute, and if you could kind of comment after all this research, how would you suggest somebody navigates these challenges?
as we talked earlier, these are big projects, and in the past, many have failed because people kind of get together and they decide, okay, we've got to do it all at once. We got to serve all publics and all that kind of stuff. And not necessarily the case. As we mentioned, you want to do a risk analysis. You want to look at where is the risk the highest, and can I solve that with a certain technology, and will that technology extend to the rest of my environment? Hopefully it will, right? And increasingly, the newer products and the newer solutions we're seeing come out understand this diversity and build in accommodations for it. But the first thing, of course, is that the user interface really matters, right? It really matters on the B2C side, as we mentioned, but it really also kind of matters on the workplace side as well. Gone are the days where you could find talent anywhere you wanted and they would stick with the company for 20 years and all that kind of stuff, right? It's part of the equation to make life comfortable for employees and partners as well. So definitely focus on the user interface. If it seems clunky, if it's awkward, if it requires external assistance, not so good, right? Secondly, of course, preserve privacy, right? And make sure that you're adhering to any regulations and legislation and stuff like that. GDPR was the poster child for this. It came in. There were privacy requirements before that, but not like we've seen recently. CCPA, and there are another 2 or 3. I think in a former study that I did, there are 17 such regulations in different countries around the world. So keep an eye on that and make sure that whatever you do is not going to violate any kind of things and open you up to fines and stuff like that. Thirdly, a lot of people think of security as the Department of No, right? They really want to bypass it because it doesn't lead to a better product. It doesn't lead to a better app. It leads to safer usage of an app. But I think what you need to do is you need to look for the savings that you can provide. And there are definitely operational savings. We talked about avoiding the help desk, right? And we talked about avoiding password resets and stuff like that. There are many more opportunities to be operationally efficient across the business. So look for those things. And that's what you want to emphasize to your C-suite, to tell them, we're not just making this investment because we have to. We're making this investment because we want to. It will improve the organization. And lastly, don't be held back by legacy apps. They're going to be there. They're not going away. How many times have you heard passwordless in the last couple of years? Guess what? The passwords are still there. I was at RSA this year. We did go to RSA in person this year. And I asked everybody who said passwordless to me, oh yeah, but there's still a backend password, a registration password, right? 100% of the time you hear yes. So you need something that can accommodate passwords and accommodate legacy apps, and just admit that that's going to be in the equation for the next 5 years or so.
Thanks, Jay. It was certainly great to get a walk through those statistics, those survey results, and to see really where the value is for different players within this ecosystem. So as we leave today, let's think about actions for municipalities. Truly, privacy and trust have gone mainstream for municipalities, and creating special interest groups to work together to have those tables for discussion to bring us together to leverage the opportunities, enumerate what the risks are. Having a special interest group for this kind of discussion is integral. And so this is something we're very supportive at the DIAC. In terms of municipalities working together, well, we need to identify what are the short-term opportunities and the long-term opportunities. And this is something we can all work together to advance. And for us at the DIAC, we're here to work together and collaborate as well with our Pan-Canadian Trust Framework. Really, this Pan-Canadian Trust Framework defines a definition of a duty of care for what people, clients, citizens, and residents would come to expect with the types of identity services that they're interacting with. And so this is a tool to help us bridge through technologies and make sure that we have common trust and assurance with every service that we interact with. So it was really great to get all of this research and insights from Portage CyberTech today.
Hey, and just wanted to add, love to see the forward-thinking approach, and love to see the Canadian environment taking the lead in many respects on this type of technology.
Thanks, Don, Jay, Joni, very much appreciate your contributions today. We would invite everyone attending today's webinar to download our companion info brief at portagecybertech.com/privacy. That concludes today's webinar. Thanks very much for your time and attention. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you joining us in the webinar zone and watching this MW webinar. Don't forget to find and follow this episode's expert speakers and sponsor on LinkedIn and social media. Thanks again for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.